Ladies and gentlemen, while the world has forgotten about Afghanistan and the entire attention of media is on Ukraine, which is indeed a critical issue that needs to be addressed. But what about Afghanistan, that have been in a similar and now worse situation than Ukraine for the past 40 years, and that paid the ultimate sacrifice against the former Soviet Union from 1979 till 1989, which Ukrainian people are giving now against Russians. There are some questions I would like to put here for you all to think of throughout this session. What are the human costs of these wars? Who benefits from these wars? And why do we have ineffective international institutions and foreign policies that lead to more wars? And why such a stark difference between the value of a life of a citizen from Afghanistan, Ukraine, or United States? While we are sitting here today now, Afghanistan is suffering under the Taliban regime. The country is facing one of the biggest displacement crises in the world. Over half of the population, 23 million people, are in acute food insecurity. 8.4 million people are facing emergency level food insecurity, and 1 million children are at risk of severe malnourishment. Fundamental rights of the people are taken away. Girls are not allowed access to secondary education. Women are not allowed outside without a male companion. Women and girls are sexually enslaved. Foreign TV and content is banned. Systematic persecution and act of genocide against Hazaras and persecution of many other ethnic groups in Afghanistan is ongoing. And the government is an all-inclusive Taliban government comprised of mostly one ethnic group in Afghanistan ruling over a country consisting of more than 50 diverse ethnic groups. The humanitarian situation in Afghanistan is worsening every day, and based on UN projections, by mid-2022, Afghanistan could face universal poverty, with 97% of the country living below the World Bank designated international poverty line of $1.9 a day. Food security levels have plunged at an alarming rate, leaving half the population facing severe hunger, including 9 million in a state of emergency food insecurity, the highest number in the world. Economic decline, drought, and high food prices have resulted in 18.9 million people, 45% of the population, projected to be facing crisis or emergency food insecurity from June 2022 to November 2022. And based on UN estimates, 3.2 million children will suffer from acute malnutrition in 2022, and 1 million severely malnourished children are at risk of death. And according to a report by Save the Children, up to 121,000 children in Afghanistan may have been exchanged for death since August 2021. All this, and still, the richest country in the world, United States, have frozen $7 billion of Afghan reserve funds, giving half of it to 9/11 families for which people of Afghanistan had no share in. In addition to the humanitarian situation, killing of ordinary people, genocide of Hazaras, and persecution of many other minority ethnic groups have increased. Hazaras have been attacked in education centers, maternity hospital, sports centers, passengers en route to their houses, wedding halls and bazaars across the country, now and during the past 20 years by the Taliban and their allied extremist groups, and throughout previous centuries, most notably during the period of Abdul Rahman. After the Taliban takeover, the genocidal act against Hazaras increased extensively, starting in Geti, Kahur, and the Hanikol district of Daikundi, which resulted in killing of the villagers from that area. These crimes also continued against the Uzbek people in northern Afghanistan, in districts of Qaisar and Aqcha similarly. In Panjshir, Taliban entered the city and started looting, torturing, and killing ordinary civilians, hanged the president of Amrullah Saleh, former intelligence chief of Afghanistan, and did not even allow his family to bury his body. Further, due to the resistance movement's activities in Andarab and other provinces in Afghanistan, members of resistance movement have been targeted across the country. People have been shot dead with a suspicion of affiliation to these groups. The Hindu Sikh minority groups' only Gurudwara was bombed last week. The Taliban did not stop in committing such acts against the dead and ruined the grave of Ahmad Shah Massoud in Panjshir and completely destroyed the statue of Abdul Ali Mazari in Bamiyan. Even before the collapse of the corrupt puppet government of Afghanistan, in my own native province of Ghazni, on 17th of July 2021, 43 civilians were killed by the Taliban in Malistan district. Houses were looted and women were sexually assaulted. Prior to this, Taliban attacked on Jowhari district, where I come from, and killed 63 civilians, including many of my childhood friends who went to the mountains to defend our district against the Taliban. Afghanistan's modern history have been intertwined with war and conflict. Since I was born, for the youth in Afghanistan, 9/11 played a major role in shaping the future of their country. A horrific attack planned by Al-Qaeda, who were given homage in Afghanistan by the Taliban. A group originating its roots in America's support during the post-Soviet invasion of Afghanistan to educate and arm the existence of this group against the Soviets. Despite all of the controversies about the responsible terrorist group behind 9/11 attacks, Al-Qaeda is a foreign terrorist group whose leader was killed in Pakistan and not Afghanistan. And to summarize the reason behind war on terror, it was the war happened in the wrong country and for the wrong reasons. And if we consider the amount of terrorism around the world now, one would think, was it a war on terror or a war for terror? That led to death of more than 46,000 civilians, made a country suffer for more than 20 years, promoting a centralized democratic puppet government on a nation that has deep roots in community-based governance and not a centralized government. Promised state building at the same time as counter-insurgency efforts involving drones controlled by pilots from abroad, which based on a UN report killed on average from 100 to 500 civilians every year. And giving false promises to more than 30 million people in Afghanistan that democracy will change their lives. And at the end, leave them alone in the hands of an extremist force, formerly trained and armed by the United States during the Soviet occupation, who is now renamed and called the Taliban. The main reason the war on terror started in Afghanistan was in 2001 still exists in a much more extreme degree. The main justification of war on terror was protecting the Western interests due to the threat posed from Afghanistan by the two terrorist groups back then, which was later justified by women's rights, democracy, and state-building efforts. What about the 13 terrorist groups who are active in the country now? Does two terrorist groups not pose more threat than 13? It makes me think if this was a war for terror or a war on terror. What about protecting the interests of Western countries now? Protecting women's rights now, protecting minority ethnic groups' rights now, and the state of democracy. And why such a shameful agreement was made between the United States and the Taliban about the future of an independent democracy, and Afghanistan was officially handed over to the Taliban. This is where the role of international institutions like the UN and the International Criminal Court and other intergovernmental organizations come into play to hold both the internal and foreign perpetrators accountable for the situation in Afghanistan and to initiate a comprehensive investigation to bring justice to millions of families affected by war crimes, genocide, and rule of a terrorist group. This is where we act as human beings who have feelings and are not only physical beings, without the most human value of caring about one another, whose only difference is being born in a different part of the world. My ask from everyone around the world and here is, start with yourselves, contribute and give voice to the concerns of the forgotten people of Afghanistan, and raise the question of who else is worth saving. And if international organizations are not playing their role, we need to question their existence. Thank you.